One unique football player in Super Bowl 50 this year is Michael Oher, number 73, offensive tackle for the Carolina Panthers. In his youth, he had no parents to take care of him. Eventually, a kind family raises him up and gives him an education. As an adult, he is later drafted and recruited into the NFL. His adopted mom called this an amazing journey to the Super Bowl. Whether in athletics or in business or the military or in education, the recruitment phase is an important stage in one's life. And that's the first main point. You want the right people on your team. But whether it's the beginnings of an athlete in the Super Bowl, or you in a new job, or someone trying to recruit you for the military, people will often ask you, what is your story? How did you start off? We see the importance of this recruitment story in today's gospel. Here, we see the humble beginnings of Simon the fisherman, first following Jesus. Simon was called by Jesus to follow him and catch souls for God. Simon eventually became Peter, the first pope of the church. Jesus called Peter Simon and made him fish for God's kingdom. This was Simon's vocation. It was his call. That's where we get the word vocare in Latin. It means to call. And the second point is this. Just as Jesus recruited Simon Peter, so Jesus recruits you and me. Each of us has a recruitment story of how we followed him. This homily is where I get a little bit more personal with my own vocation as a deacon. Since ordination, I have preached over 50 homilies as a married permanent deacon, and my hope is to raise awareness here at St. Joseph's as to what a married deacon is. Perhaps Jesus may be calling you to be a deacon, or you might know somebody that might be interested in it, or you might, as a parish, want to support somebody that has expressed interest in it. And here is my story. I was in high school when I met my first permanent deacon at St. John's in Milpitas near San Jose. I had just started practicing my Catholic faith when my grandfather died. At the time, I was an altar server. I was also receiving the sacrament of confirmation and became a catechist. The new parish deacon's name was Eugene O'Sullivan. He was a nuclear engineer and an Irishman in his 60s from Kansas. His wife's name was Lois. When they first came to my boyhood parish, I remember clearly like it was yesterday. I don't remember the gospel or anything else that happened that day, except for maybe about 1 minute from his homily. I will take about a minute or so to repeat exactly what he said, more or less, 25 years ago right now. It's kind of like in the second reading when St. Paul said, for what I handed on to you, I will hand on to you what I also received. That was from his first letter to the Corinthians. So I'm going to hand this on to you. Perhaps Deacon O'Sullivan did not know that he was fishing that day when he preached 25 years ago. And this is what he said. More or less. He said, a deacon is a member of the clergy. He is a servant of the people. He assists the priests during Mass and outside of Mass. Deacons, pretty much over the centuries, used to be a stepping stone to become a priest, but at Vatican II, the council allowed married men to serve as permanent deacons who do not intend to become priests. That's why they're called permanent instead of transitional deacons. He said deacons can baptize, preach homilies on occasion, officiate weddings and funerals, do blessings and benedictions, and can have a wife with a family. He speaks for the voiceless and the poor through acts of charity. And deacons typically are not called father. They were called deacon, like Deacon Dennis. Permanent deacons also do not receive a salary. In fact, the joke among my brother deacons is that we get a great salary every year, which is zero, but our retirement in heaven is great when we die. So that's kind of our joke there. His wife Lois always sat in the front pew during Mass, and she closed her eyes whenever the Word of God was being read. And don't worry, she wasn't asleep, because she woke up after he said the word of the Lord. But Deacon O'Sullivan and Lois were fishers of souls that day. And then a few months later, I was at a reception celebrating the anniversary of a priest. It was December 23, 1990. And somebody from the parish, it was actually somebody from the Legion of Mary, approached me and said, "Hey, are you called to be a priest?" That parishioner was also fishing. I replied, well, I sense a call to married life. And then I said, that Deacon O'Sullivan guy, that looks attractive to me too. And he thought about it, and this is what he said. Yeah. And that's all it took for me. That affirmation was part of my recruitment story. Now, I knew that in high school that I would have to wait 20 years before the age of 35 before applying, because that is the minimum age required to become a permanent deacon. And after a career in Catholic education and religious education and years of marriage, I applied thinking, well, maybe they might ask me to wait another for the next class. And during the paperwork application process, I remember one time looking at the paper in front of me one night and being discouraged because there were a lot of requirements. I also needed to talk to the pastor who really didn't know me at the time. My wife knew the pastor more. Also, all the applicants had to be tested by a psychologist. And I, as a younger candidate, was an unlikely candidate with young kids. So that night, as I had the paperwork in front of me, I remember plopping face down on the bed, thinking, oh my gosh, this sense I had 20 years ago, is this really still there? And then, I kid you not, deep in my heart, there's a very peaceful voice that said, "Follow me, Dennis." And it wasn't just follow me, it was this "follow me, Dennis." My name was said. That's why I applied. Now, after admission, there were a few times I didn't think I was going to make it. My wife and I eventually found out that we were pregnant. And I thought, oh, this is it. I may need to drop out. So eventually when I told the diocese, one of the teachers, his name was Deacon Mark, he said to me, "Wow, a baby! What a gift!" And I continued. And this actually happened 3 times during the formation process. Another unlikely moment. Now, since the diocese knew that I was educated by Jesuit priests, I remember being asked by the diocese, in my particular case, to meet with a spiritual director every week, which I did. We did the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola. The priest told me, okay, I want you to set aside an hour to pray wherever you'd like, maybe like before the Blessed Sacrament. You decide. I said, oh, great, Father, I've been meaning to do an hour of prayer every week. And he turned to me and he said, I want you to do this every day for about 6 to 9 months. I took a gulp and I said, yeah, okay. And it was at that point in the spiritual exercises where I meditated on the Gospels every day, where I fell in love with God's people, and I encountered Jesus in the Gospels, the very same Gospels that I would later preach at Mass. And then eventually, before the bishop laid his hands on me, I was lying down on the floor in the cathedral. And at that point, it's a tradition to ask for certain virtues, and at that point I asked for the virtues of the Blessed Mother. But this second main point is what I wanted to convey, and that is, just as Jesus called Simon Peter, Jesus also recruits you and me. And I gave you my story. It's like different flowers in a garden. You know, the gardener looks at all the flowers and says, they're all different, but each has a story. I love that flower. Sometimes maybe that one a little bit more, and that one needs a little bit more work. But the gardener loves them all. And that's what God does when he looks at us, at our vocation, each of us. And finally, having heard the vocation story for Simon Peter and my own personal story in 2016, I want to offer you a few points of meditation as you discern how God has moved you. The first is that Jesus himself initiates the call. There's a popular saying, God does not call the qualified. God qualifies the called. God doesn't always pick the best people or the most likely candidates for ministry and service. But when God does, God is the one who qualifies them. The second point of meditation is that when Jesus does call, sometimes we might sense a doubt. Just like Simon Peter did when Jesus told him to go out and fish again. Master, we've been fishing all night, but I'm going to go ahead and do it. Or kind of like me when I had my doubts. Oh my gosh, this isn't going to happen. We're stuck on how we think we know things, but eventually when we do what Jesus says and asks us, he will work miracles when we reply. Just like Simon Peter did when he had the miracle of the boatload of fishes, and how Jesus worked a miracle for me, thinking, I wasn't going to make it, but here I am. And he's going to work that miracle for you when you say yes to him. Even when you doubt yourself and say, Lord, I can't do it. And this leads me to my next point of meditation. Because Simon says, depart from me, Lord, I am a sinful man. I'm a weak man. I fail. I disappoint people. I have a temper. My health isn't good. I'm too old. I'm too young. I got laid off from my job. I can't do anything. I have no money. I have too much money. I don't know what I'm going to do. My life is a wreck. But even in those moments, that's when God still calls you. In fact, he wants you even more. And he loves you that you're not perfect. And he says to you, I want you even more because of this. Because it'll show that I am the one at work when you serve and do ministry. So Jesus speaks to you and me. In fact, there's a very popular prayer in the liturgy. It goes like this. You choose the weak and make them strong in bearing witness to you. And that's what Jesus will do to you if you just say yes to him. Do not be afraid, he will tell you, for you will be catching souls for God. Now, the apostles, they left everything and they followed him. Now, for you and me who are not priests and nuns, what does this mean? How can we apply this in our own lives? Well, there must be some type of spiritual meaning to that, where they left all and followed him. What that means is that we leave behind our old selves. They left all. They left their egos. They left their feeling of weakness. They left their old selves at the door, so to speak. And leaving everything, then, has this sense of leaving our old spiritual baggage behind. And remember, Simon Peter, he was called at work. He wasn't called in the temple, sitting in the temple. So God may call you at work or at school or when you're doing the laundry or going for a walk or whatever. And the point is, whatever circumstances you are in, the point is to still say, yes, Jesus, here I am. No matter what the circumstances are. So, dear brothers and sisters, what is your recruitment story? What is your vocation story in 5 to 10 minutes? How has God called you and recruited you? And how have you responded? And perhaps this Lenten season, which starts on Ash Wednesday, this Wednesday, February 10, you can prayerfully discern for 40 days, where is God taking me? In the movie The Passion of the Christ, when Mary is chasing after Jesus while he's carrying his cross, and eventually Mary says, I'm here, son. Let those words re-echo for us. And did you catch that from the first reading? Because in the first reading, it is written in the book of the prophet Isaiah. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? Who will go for us? And may your response and mine always be every day, like Mary. I'm here. I am here. Here I am. Here I am. Here I am. Send me. Amen.